Okay, we should be live now. So welcome everyone who's here. I'm going to be talking with a developer of a VR headset, and there will be some opportunity to ask questions at the end, so feel free to, I will be keeping an eye on the chat, and if you have any questions, I will do my best to interject them if it makes sense at the time or at the end. So I do have to give a couple of disclaimers. So we did some testing yesterday, and unfortunately the quality of streaming, doing a live video call between Herman and myself was not good enough. So, but I did see Herman's face yesterday, and we'll just be using audio today, and I'll have some other video footage playing, showing information that Herman sent through to me. And I want to be clear, this interview isn't an endorsement. I haven't actually personally had a chance to use a prototype because I'm in a different continent. But, you know, it's information that I hope will be useful to people and hopefully will help Herman progress his project. So I initially found out about this from Reddit, and I just sent a message to Herman and suggested it might be a good idea to do an interview if he was interested, and thankfully he was, so here we are. So I'll switch over and ask Herman to introduce himself and tell us a little bit about his background and how he started working on this VR headset. So hi Herman, thank you for joining us. Please tell us about yourself and the project.
Good afternoon, Brian. Well, my name's Herman, but many people know me as WalkerDev. So maybe for the last 5 years, I've been working on this headset. Originally, it was called Ultra Ultra, but then I changed it to the Vector Gear. We finally went to the name of the post on. So I started development on it many, many years ago. It was back when maybe Sword Art Online Ordinal Scale came out. I remember seeing the show and I was like,
So I seem to have lost Herman's audio.
so with the Ordinal Scale and the HoloLens, I was like, wow, the HoloLens is pretty limited. So from there, I got to work. I remember I started out not really being able to do hardware too much after a few prior projects that I did. So I focused much more on software. Not only that, but hardware costs money, whereas software is free. If you actually look at the old servers, you can go and see things ranging back from like the very, very first UI designs, which were pretty substandard to right now, which everything is almost complete.
So what was the, you, when we spoke earlier, you spoke about your, I guess, motivation for what made you start trying to build a VR headset. Can you talk a little bit about that?
When I watched Sora Online and I saw Ordinal Scale, when I saw augmented reality and how it was looped in with the environment, I was like, wow, this is going to be something that it's not just like pretty much a video game, but it could be used way very much outside of that. We're talking about the next internet.
Mm.
But at the time, the technology was way too far behind. And instead of waiting for some corporation to maybe make something 20 years from now, I was like, it's better that I start myself and then I go from there.
Cool. And at that stage, did you have, like, what experience did you have with electronics and prototyping, 3D modeling? Did you have any of that? How did you sort of build up that experience?
Okay, so for this part, it's kind of important to know that one of the reasons that I studied engineering in general was after I saw the Iron Man 1 movie, right? And I really liked how Tony Stark was like, hey, I'm not going to put any limits on anything that I see unless I experiment with it myself first, right? So because of that, one of the things that I started trying to make back when I was in the sixth or seventh grade was an Iron Man suit. In fact, if you look at my hackaday.io page, you'll probably see the project there. So I had a few like metalworking things, like you know how to do a little coding and anything like that, but definitely not to the skills that I was able to do today.
Mhm. And was there, you know, what's been the most difficult part of the process of that self-learning? Was there anything particularly that stood out as hard to, was it just like, as long as you persevered and kept going, like, did you use YouTube University or other Hackaday information? What were the main resources on those things that were hard that you found useful?
Well, there's really two sides when you try to make any kind of startup, right? And that's the technological side and the business side, sort
Mhm.
of the tech side. With the technology, I really had to teach myself everything from scratch. For example, I'll see this YouTube video. Hey, here's how you do so and so in Unity, and then how do you go and make this with and that, right? And I remember using Tinkercad. In fact, I still use Tinkercad because it's just with me the easiest. But when you're working with them, one of the things that you really can't afford to tell yourself is, "Hey, this is too hard. I'm gonna learn it later." No, you literally like can't afford to because when later
Mm.
comes, you either have that like know-how and is able to go like forward with it,
Yeah.
or you don't know anything and you're just pretty much stuck.
Mhm.
And then when it comes to the business side, I remember I didn't really have any like connections or anything like that, nor was I like, nor am I from like, how do we say it? Any place rich. I wasn't born with a silver spoon, right? So my main thing that I did, I learned how to make a business pitch online, right? And then I went to several competitions. At first, there was nothing ever much from it, but then things became better and better. For example, there was a time where I actually was a semi-finalist for an international competition. I actually did meet my congressman because of an augmented reality app I made and so on and so forth. So one of the main things though that really went and like pushed development forward was definitely going and actually getting funding.
Mhm.
Because it was like I essentially went from having to go and pull literally anything that I could find to being able to say, hey, I'm gonna go and buy this part, I'm gonna go and make this diagram, and then I'm gonna put it together from scratch,
Mhm.
right? And I could thank Nifty for that. That's I networking for teachers on entrepreneurship, right? I would really recommend that to anybody watching who's still in school, right? Because that will give you a really good sense to actually get into a business while you're still young with your own idea. So from there, it really became an uphill competition for a little while, though, because, for example, when I started making this newer version, there was the IPD system, for example. I had no idea how to go and actually make it. So I hired maybe three people, all in all, maybe spending around what, $2,000. And that doesn't sound like a lot, but as a 19-year-old college student,
Mm.
that's a very much a lot, right? So from there, because of that, I essentially didn't get anything good out of it. I remember one guy literally sent me a model he found from online. There was pretty much nothing that I was looking for, and I was like, hey, I'm not going to use you. So a point just came where I was like, hey, you know what? I'm going to have to do this myself. Either I
Mm.
pay a high price or I have to like learn. So I did, and somehow it ended up working out perfectly because as you can see in some of the prototypes that I've made, there's an IPD system and everything like that. And in fact, right now, I'm actually working on a focal system for people with glasses.
Cool. Has there been any part of the process that ended up being way easier than you expected?
Honestly, no, not a single. I can't think of a single thing where it was like, man, this is so easy.
Yeah.
Everything you have to go and really imagine it being five times harder than it is,
Mm.
and then how you're gonna go through that. Because if you can't, then it's gonna like blindside you. Because when you're going and doing something from like maybe there's a YouTube tutorial online, that's one thing.
Mm.
When you're making all these new processes by yourself from scratch, there is not really any handouts. It's like yes, you have all this freedom and creativity, but you have to at the same time learn to go and essentially use it in like every aspect, which is not ever going to be easy.
Mm. And I guess starting out with I mean, there's a benefit to not knowing what you don't know at the start because you can end up doing things in ways that someone in the industry with a lot of experience might not do because they just have this ingrained sort of this is the limits of what you can do. Whereas starting with nothing, you don't know those limits, but you've also got to learn those limits where they do really apply. Um, it's funny you say you use Tinkercad because I still primarily use Tinkercad for modeling as well. I just find it's the least friction and it works really well with the way my brain thinks about how to design a model of something. So, um, is there anything that you think you might have done differently if you were to, like, if you knowing what you know now, if you were to embark upon this journey again, is there parts of it that you would have approached differently? You think?
There's many, but for starters, I would have learned how to use Figma, right?
Uh-huh.
Figma is just online software where you can make user interfaces, right?
Mm.
And we'll kind of pretty much design them. And when I first started out, even though I had the good idea, the thing was my UIs looked really, really bad because I didn't know how to go and make them properly. I never thought about user experience for too much.
Mm-hmm.
But when I actually got to using Figma, the entire thing pretty much changed on how it's like all looked, right, and how it all interacted. Aside from that, I would definitely switch from Unity because all the things that are happening right now, but I
Mm.
don't think that I really had any way of knowing that. Like I used to be a Unity evangelist, kind of like I'm gonna use everything for Unity, but that can't really be the case anymore.
Yeah.
But if there was one real thing that I would change, it would definitely be with the single board computer. At the very beginning, I was like, hey, we're going to use a mobile processor for this, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I was going to open up a phone, use AR Core, and then try to get that
Mm.
working.
Mm-hmm.
However, you can't get AR Core working with a custom IMU, right?
Yep.
Second thing, I was like, okay, we're going to use the Time 86. Only a time at the time, the only board that was really good at Times 86 was the Udu Bolt, right? And
Mm.
that thing's expensive, it's large. Like right now, we have a lot of different alternatives, but at the time, we definitely didn't. Then after that, I was like, we're gonna go use an ARM board. This was actually when I went around making my first prototype. I ended up buying it was a MXM card and an MXM converter, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I connected that to an RK3580 that's 16 gigabytes. I thought it was going to work out. It turns out that it didn't, not because like of the technical know-how and like something wrong there, but mainly because one, the MXM card, as it turns out, actually doesn't run very well unless you go and get something specialized and large, right?
Mm.
Because originally it was supposed to all be standalone. And aside from that, when you're actually looking at the design and trying to put everything in, another problem that you don't really think about when you're actually designing it is how you're going to go and fit it all in, right?
Mm-hmm.
And pretty much with that, I had to go and change the entire thing to a puck design. I did have a puck design in mind when I was using the Udu Bolt. And the funny thing is, the current one is actually like in terms a little larger, but at the same time much smaller, right? Like
Mm.
it's no longer a backpack; it's two like die straps are really easy to put on and off.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, it's definitely not anything that's simple.
Okay. I mean, I can see advantages of going the SBC route just because the risk you take leveraging a mobile device is that, you know, the organization that makes the operating system of the device makes changes that break your stuff, and then you could potentially end up chasing your tail just trying to keep that working. Whereas with your own sort of hardware and OS stack, you're in control of it, so you know it's less likely to have issues in the future, which I think would be helpful as well. Um, how you mentioned that you did get some funding. You might have said that, but it is a little bit hard to hear sometimes. I'm hoping that the auto subtitling will clarify that later. But was that because of an event that you entered that you got the funding, or was it people that you knew chipped in?
Personally, I wouldn't really even have anybody to go and like give money to go and start my company, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it was because of a competition.
Yeah.
What essentially happened, there was this thing Niffy did. It was for the summer, right?
Mm-hmm.
The thing is, it's supposed to be for like high schoolers, but in reality, it's supposed to go and be for kind of like at the border. So I sent an email out, hey, do you think that I'd be able to go and, kind of push myself into this program? They said
Mm-hmm.
yes, thankfully. And it was you get some funding for like staying in there 4 weeks, right?
Okay.
But
Yeah.
there was a competition.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Yeah. I mean that's also a good thing that I've found is though I've had this happen in even job applications in the past where, you know, don't always just assume that the scope of what they're saying is the limit you have to apply to. It's never hurts to send an email and ask. The worst they can do is say no. And, you know, in your case, this worked out and you got in. So that's something for other, you know, people who are keen to try and do something like this or so on. So yeah, it's really cool. Cool. So I'm just scrolling through the website a bit. So I'm quite interested in the. I'm probably going to mess up the pronunciation. The Zurios, the working environment. Now there was some video clips playing earlier of that, showing obviously very early stage stuff. But I think a well thought out sort of 3D operating system is something that has been lacking for a long time, and I think is something that could be really exciting if it works well. So, how do you typically split up your work between hardware development, business development, and software development at the moment? Like, do you do do you break it up to certain days of the week you work on one of the things, or you just flip between them? Because I imagine some people might think that having those three things is too much for one person, but it also, as someone who does development myself, sometimes it allows you to, what's the word? It's like effective procrastination. So at the point where you want to procrastinate, you can move on to one of the other things and you end up doing something productive instead of losing time. So can you talk about that a bit for how you work that?
The thing you said about procrastination is honestly really, really good, right?
Mm,
Like pretty much for me, right now I'm working on the smallest headset, right?
mm,
And for that, I need to go and remake the entire lens system. And since I don't really want to go and completely focus on it right now, I've been working on the serials. Also, I'm supposed to go and have essentially what is the entire UX kind of like able for my, how we say, my essentially co-founder, right, of Wired to go and essentially check out everything, see how it all works.
mm-hmm.
But because of how advanced all of the things with the permission system is, I haven't been able to do that. So being able to go and essentially focus on one thing one at a time has been really beneficial, however, because I can always just go and focus, right?
Mm-hmm.
But overall, when you were saying about the serials, I want to elaborate on this a little. The thing that I really didn't like, for example, when I was looking at different operating systems, was one, their cost, because it's like when you get software, it should essentially, be completely yours. There
Yeah.
shouldn't be any like accessories to it. Aside from that, however, I also didn't like, for example, how many things when it comes to like VR and desktops, it always keeps it to like a 2D space. Mozilla had their thing, they kept it two space.
Mm.
Here's Immersed as well. They only have five desktops, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Meanwhile, mine is able to do unlimited desktops. It can do unlimited virtual machines. Well, not technically unlimited, but as much as the hardware can support, right? For
Yeah.
example,
So
if you're
only
doing like a
constrained by
super high
resources.
end,
Mm.
yes. So with that, pretty much what happens is I wanted to go and make something where instead of just saying, hey, we have all these 2D UIs and 3D, I wanted people to go on, for example, turn on that headset and be like, man, this is actually something, that I could see myself using. And even though it's new, I can see myself applying it similarly to as I would a regular operating system
Mm.
or any other tool.
Mm-hmm.
So one example that I have, right? When I was working on the headset, I was like, man, I could really go and use something to go and, help me take notes. So I actually ended up making a prototype of this in an augmented reality app. I have no clue where the APK for it is now, otherwise I would share it.
Mm-hmm.
But one thing that I ended up doing, I would be able to go and put all of my stuff around, right? And I would be able to go and put notes that I would type up, and then later when I go back to my room, I'll be able to go and see each thing, like, hey, make sure you put this battery here.
Mm.
So and so is hitting here, so make sure you go and use it later. And even when I was talking to another guy, right, he had no interest in augmented or virtual reality. Back with the EA12 prototype from Messi, I showed him it, right? Put it on, and he was like, wow, these things are so good
Mm.
that if, for example, Android and everything was working inside of there, I don't see why I would need another device.
Yeah.
So that's something that I've been really trying to go and push forward within this like operating system.
Well, I think it's, I've had a bit of an interest in sort of memory Olympics and things like that, and having an operating system that allows you to place the notes in a physical location means that you have access to the note in the context where it's actually useful, rather than putting it in a, like notes on my Mac. I have to remember that I need to open notes to find the right note. Whereas if you can just stick it in a space, you walk into the space and it's there, visible near the thing that it's related to. That's really powerful, I think, and I think it would be awesome. Like it was kind of the promise of Google Glass, was the idea of having, the ideas that me and some friends thought about, at least back then, besides the fact that it was a bit weird to wear at that time for people being creeped out. But that ability to have contextually aware information available to supplement or to remind you, like I guess for a VR headset, it's not necessarily the same, but at some point it will get down to the glasses like size that you've got and be able to be worn all the time, potentially with mixed reality. And you might be looking at someone and it shows their name underneath for you because you're not very good at remembering names or something. And that, I think, is going to be a real breakout point for all of this technology to truly supplement and improve the way that you can interact with other people, which is not what people think about this technology for necessarily, is how it can improve human interaction and make your life easier. But yeah.
Yeah, it's funny that you actually say that
Mm,
because how do we say it? When I started with augmented reality and the like, right, there was this one video, I think it's called hyper reality.
mhm,
And that's the entire thing that gives me the entire idea of placing things. But another reason that I'm working on the serials isn't just because of, for example, the software end, but because of the fact that I believe, for example, many corporations, they're going in to essentially make their own like garden walls, right?
mm,
And I think that XR is going to be something that becomes super, super huge in the upcoming years. Maybe not today, not tomorrow, but
mm,
if you go and open up it 20 years from now, it's going to be something that's just built into into society as a whole, right?
yeah.
And you really look into corporations now, you see how like greedy and selfish they are when they come to different things, how they essentially want to place a so-called. So my entire thing is when we have to go on and ensure that the power is going to the people, otherwise, essentially, the corporations get to do what they want.
Mm,
And it should be obvious that if the corporations could, they would essentially make us pay for the air that we breathe. One example that I've been doing is within the like software system. I have part of the license that I'm working on. It's essentially, hey, aside from inside of your app at certain areas and inside of a small brochure that the user can open anytime they want, you cannot put any ads on the environment whatsoever.
mm,
Sure, it will be good from like what's it called, a capitalist point of view, right, or a consumer's point of view.
mhm.
But the thing is, and for somebody who's regularly living their life, do you really want to wake up and then you just see like a giant 50-meter tall ad for like Coca-Cola or something?
No.
Like that sounds like an actual hellscape. So I'm like, no, thank you. We
Yeah.
should definitely do something about that now. And instead of just saying, hey, we're gonna go, maybe give you a little slap on the wrist or whatever, I'm trying to go and essentially make it so that it automatically scales. Like if you're a person, we're gonna go and take 20 or 40% of whatever you got.
Mm,
If you're a corporation, we're gonna take not only from the corporation as a whole, but all of the major shareholders, stuff like that. So essentially people know not to go and essentially do it. Otherwise there are actual punishments instead of like small flip on the wrist.
mhm. And I think this is a good dovetail into sort of the next phase of questioning that I had. So, in our discussions, you've mentioned that the aim is to crowdfund the project. So, um, do you want to talk about what the timeline is for that, where things are at? If you know what crowdfunding network you're planning to do it on, what the purpose of the funds from crowdfunding is for, or how you will
All
use the
right, so
funds.
I plan on using Indiegogo, right? And the reason that we're using Indiegogo instead of Kickstarter is because we can have flexible goals. So, for example, if we don't meet our goal, we're still going to be able to go and use those funds for future development.
Hmm.
Now, for us, the actual funds themselves, the first and primary thing that we're using is to go and essentially make sure that we have prototypes made, right? We can go on further it until we reach that perfect final product. Outside of that, however, we want to go and start essentially mini factory, right? You want to go and rent a warehouse. You want to make sure everything through the floors, also and all that. And then we want to start a mini printer farm and an assembly line. So in that way, we're able to go and keep what is essentially really, really low profits for us,
Hmm.
but at the same time, really, really low prices for the user.
Mm.
Because otherwise, let's say that I were to go and use funding, right? There was one case already, I believe it was Techstars maybe. They were like, hey, we're kind of interested inside of this project. But instead of for like 20K, I believe it was, they essentially took a huge chunk of your company.
Percentage, yeah.
And if that happens, well, many times your company essentially gets lobbied. So instead of being like, hey, it's like we're working on something that's going to be good for people's lives and it's going to be revolutionary and we're taking a low profit cut because we believe that it's important that it gets to the people hand more than we make money.
Mm.
And an investor with more power might be able to say, we don't care, we want money. If you don't go and make us money, we're going to kick you out. That's probably my biggest fear for this thing, which is
Mm.
why the Indiegogo and crowdfunding is so powerful.
Hmm.
Now, in the case that crowdfunding goes well, what I essentially want to do, again, I want to go and make that warehouse. I want to make a mini factory. I want to have prototypes set up. But I also do want to finally go to some events like, oh, just because they're fancy and people can go and, learn more about your product. But at the same time, I do want to start a small developer fund, right?
Hmm.
This will be for indie developers. So I'd be able to say, hey, you see this right here, you can go and use it, or maybe you can keep it, right? All we ask is that you go and make a really good app for it, right?
Mm.
The reason that is because when you first use the Stereos, there's two types of apps. There's the base operating system, which is essentially like the Windows apps and what will be eventually Linux.
Hmm.
And at the same time, there are also the actual operating system apps, right? Which is the stuff that's made to go and make everything 3D. So we want to make sure that it doesn't feel empty when the user first uses it.
Hmm.
Now, aside from that, when it comes to crowdfunding, we are also going and looking at alternative ways of funding. For example, there are smaller products that I do plan on selling. For example, I know that the gloves could definitely be sold as their own things since with
Hmm.
Steam VR,
Hmm.
it would be able to go and be just most other headsets. So with that, we want to go and kind of open up our ways of funding. There isn't really a limit onto how much we can see in the foreseeable future, unless we get some like crazy thing like $1 or $2 million. Then that would be a whole entire different story.
Yeah. Um, so we've spoken in a sort of small meeting we had before. I think it's worth covering again. You spoke about that a lot of what you're doing is using off-the-shelf parts, and I think that's really important because it's extremely hard logistically to create everything from scratch on such an intricate product. So you've already, what's the type of discussions you've had with them to do with minimum order quantities? Um, I assume there's an upper limit to what you can, a lower limit and an upper limit to what you can realistically expect to achieve in a efficient way for a crowdfunding project, so that you don't get in a situation where it's taking forever to deliver, I guess, is what I'm trying to cover. Because I know that some Kickstarter projects actually suffer from being too successful, and it can actually hinder how well they proceed.
Yeah, on my end, what I did, right? Every single thing that's inside of essentially the materials list, every single one, you can buy a single one if you'd like, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe two. The only exception is maybe the cameras where you need to go and buy five.
Mm-hmm.
But essentially, everything is able to essentially be like really easily bought if you're in the DIY space. Instead of you having to go and buy 100 or 200 and then price that down and say, hey guys, it's definitely open source. I really
Mm.
like that thing. Aside from that, though, when it comes to, how do we say it, the maximum order quantity. Most of these companies have already been running for a long time. For example, you might be familiar with B-Link, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's one of the companies that we actually talk to. They're able to make huge, massive quantities. So unless we again become some type of like Oculus Quest overnight,
Mm.
then we don't really have to go and actually worry about that. And at my end, I'm essentially like I'm thinking maybe 100 or 200 is what we're able to go and sell realistically, right? But in terms of how much we're actually able to go and do, we'd be able to do like 50, $60,000. I mean, 50, 60,000 prototypes easily. Now, that wouldn't mean that it wouldn't be completely easy, because again, one of the things that we want to go and do is have essentially our own manufacturing line.
Mm.
So there would be a time at the start where we have to go and actually expand all of that. But once that's done, we'd be able to go and essentially do it one, two, three, and then continue.
And the other thing which we haven't covered in a lot of detail is, and I kind of in the thumbnail for the video, I said you've designed 3 VR headsets, and while you have, it's essentially a single core, so you're leveraging the experience in a way that builds and doesn't also create a massive amount of additional complexity per headset for you. So I think that's a very smart move to have taken that approach as well.
Thank you.
And then, so I guess I think you've smattered the words that I was expecting through your responses a little bit, but like, what do you see as your key value proposition versus available headsets on the market?
When I initially started making the headset, I wanted it to be modularity or open sourceness.
Mm-hmm.
But I realized that for the average consumer, that wouldn't really be something important. So nowadays, it's actually the fact that it's times 86, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, if you want to use a Pico 4, you want to use an Oculus Quest, you have to go and use from essentially the small list of games that have been like
Mm-hmm.
essentially turned into things that can run on rocks, right? Super low visual quality. You've already seen it with like I forgot the name of the game, but it actually ended up becoming super, super low quality with technology behind it in order to go and run on the Quest, right?
Are you talking
But
about
instead, what
Onward?
I decided was
I think
Which one?
Onward was a first person shooter.
The FPS one, right?
Yeah, that
Yeah.
one. Yeah, I actually played it on the Index before, and it was quite good. And then after it got bought by Meta or whatever happened, the Meta release, yeah, it was nerfed so bad it was horrible to play. So
Yeah, I saw it and I was like, I don't know how anybody could allow this. Like,
yeah.
personally, I think I would allow my headset to die off before I allow it to go and become like a caca product. But that's just me.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is a
But
real. I do see this as a huge problem in the industry at the moment. Is so much development resources are going into developing Quest games to the point where the best games that we have in VR are many years old in many cases now. Like, and it happened to Ready at Dawn. They got bought by Oculus, and now they don't make PC VR games. And like, Lone Echo and Lone Echo 2 are two of my favorite VR experiences. Yeah, it's like Asgard's Wrath, I guess, is going to be one now that the next version's for the Quest only. It's kind of the progressive enshittification of gaming experience in VR because of the limitations of standalone VR headsets. So I am really, from that aspect, I hope that you succeed. I've been waiting so long for a successor to the Valve Index that, I was very happy with the Valve Index as a VR headset. The only thing I would need to change to still be happy with it now would be to increase the resolution. Really, it had good sound, and I see from the specs that you're using similar speakers from the same manufacturer. So, what truly was the all-round sort of best mix of everything, where all the other headsets seem to make trade-offs that make it deficient in some area. So, and is it like, what do you? Sorry, no, I'm going to go back a little bit. So the open sourceness of it, I think, is good, and the fact that minimum order quantities are 1 are really amazing, because if for whatever reason you don't succeed, there's still software is something that community can pick up and can contribute to make better as well. But having access to the hardware, if for whatever reason it doesn't go well enough for the company to survive, then the product doesn't necessarily have to die. People can still use it. They can get parts. Of course, we hope you succeed, but I think that's very important. And I read almost every other day about how organizations are locking down their hardware so that you can't easily repair it yourself because it's software locked to an individual device and all of that sort of thing. So I don't know if I have a question there for you, unfortunately. It's just me rambling. But I also was quite heartened to hear your thoughts about having a fund for developers. That was also something I think the initial Oculus device was really targeted at developers more so than end users, because I assume they understood as well that you need developers for the product to succeed. One question I do have is, have you, because of the whole situation with Unity, have you made a decision on how you'll tackle that problem now? I assume it's not economically viable to continue with Unity if the product succeeds, because of the way the licensing is changing, even though they've sort of backtracked on that a little bit. But I assume that you wouldn't feel confident to go ahead in that aspect. Have you chosen a new engine to use at this point?
I already know that Loaf is like watching and he's like, Godot, you have to use Godot.
Godot, yeah.
Because the moment that the Unity information came out, he was instantly like, hey, you should move to Godot. I was like, I kind of want to use Unreal Engine. And then we kind of had like a back and forth about it, and I was
Mm,
like, I kind of like Unreal Engine 5, but then she was like, hey, you know what? It's super super processor heavy, right?
mm, mhm.
And the thing that I realized about Godot is the fact that since it's so early, I can actually do whatever I want with it at this point, right? Like
Yeah.
if I need something done, like visually wise, right? Instead
Mhm.
of waiting for somebody to go and make this kind of asset, I can literally go into the like engine itself and make it. And that's
Yes.
one thing that she really really pushed forward, but I didn't understand until later.
Yeah.
So when time comes, I do want to actually move everything to Godot.
Mhm.
I've already talked to 802 Interactive a long time ago. That's a game development studio.
Mhm.
But essentially, I want them to go and have everything move to Godot, and then once that's done, we'll go and continue from there, right?
Mhm.
Maybe that'll be a 2.0 update. Maybe if I'm lucky enough to go and have the funds, that might be before everything releases.
Mhm.
Speaking of, I did want to talk about one thing to the times 86 before we continue.
Yeah.
Um, you're talking about how, for example, the Oculus Quest is essentially the cheapest thing around right now, and people are mainly using it. So what I've been doing, I I hate no, I hate meta pretty much, right? That should be really obvious
Yeah.
from like all the work that I'm doing. But literally the moment that I saw the price for the Quest 3, right? I
Mhm.
was like, I have to get to work on this now.
Mhm.
So I ended up making a times 86 board, right? I'm not board, a headset.
Mhm.
And the best thing about that, it has eye tracking, it has pretty much everything that you'd want from a regular headset.
Mm.
The only thing that I actually want to work on a lot is the resolution,
Mhm.
because for the price, the resolution has to be 1400 by 1400. However, I want to go and see if I can talk to another manufacturer, maybe go and get those prices like a little lower for a higher resolution display, right?
Mhm.
I want to have at least like 1800 by 1800, if not 1600 by 1600. But all in all, I want to be able to go and have that in there. So instead of people kind of, being forced to use the Quest 3, I'm like, hey guys, for the Quest 3's price, well, lower than the Quest 3's price, you get something that has more RAM, more space, and can automatically play everything inside your Steam library, including the VR and non-VR games.
Yeah.
And the only thing you have to do is pay a little lower. So
Mm.
I don't really know how, like, on my end, I guess I would have to go and advertise it really well, but
Mm.
I don't see how that would be a downgrade from a Quest 3 personally after resolution.
Well, I mean, I think if you look at the Steam Deck, it proves that I think the form factor is sometimes more important than resolution. Um, you know, there's a lot of gamers who don't use their PC anymore. They use their Steam Deck just because it's practical. But there's also the catch-22. So I definitely like high-end PC VR. So, I have a pretty powerful PC, but I really, really want wireless lighthouse tracked VR experience, like a wireless HMD. So um, I think with Wi-Fi 6E, we're getting closer to the point where streaming the video is a real possibility. But also in discussions of the simulator Discord one of the simulator Discords I'm in, the talk of putting a lightweight PC on a motion simulator and then game streaming it using the Steam. Now, I don't even know if you can stream VR, but I assume it's possible in some way. I mean, virtual desktop's essentially doing that. So, but I wonder how viable that approach is to get the graphical fidelity and shading and all of that sort of stuff while having the ability to play a lot of your library directly on device. What do you think about that?
For me, what I've been doing, right? There's actually two pucks per se inside the headset.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, there's one to the left that has all the batteries. Now, the bad thing is it's around like 4 or 5 pounds, but since it is on a thigh, you're barely going to notice it most of the time, right? And now at the same time, on the right side, what I've been doing, there's three different puck designs. The first one, it's made for low-end VR and AR. This is the one that you can go and choose, and whenever you choose a $450 headset, it actually comes with that allows you to go and play Beat Saber, Pavlov, other things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Like even if you're putting it against the Quest, though, the thing is that puck has a GPU and a CPU inside of it,
Yeah.
and it's going to easily outperform the Quest 2 or the Quest 3, right?
Mm-hmm.
Pretty much any type of like Snapdragon chip, and that's going to be really really good for developers.
Mm.
At the same time, though, if you like me, I mean, if you're like me and you want to play some super crazy high fidelity game, 8K graphics,
Mm.
we had a prototype. This one is using the Ryzen 5500U and it's using, I forget the name of the GPU. I believe it was a 660M,
Mhm.
if 8 gigabytes of RAM, right? But essentially, even without me plugging in the CPU and the embedded GPU by itself was able to play Star Citizen.
Mm.
So you can go and expect a lot of that when
Impressive.
the CPU is plugged in for VR and AR.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool. So I think if I've got anything else at the moment. So where to from here? What's if someone's interested and they want to start following things? We've got the website, which I brought up before. So that's walkerindustries.xyz. Where's the primary place that people should go to interact with you? What's the preferred one?
Definitely Discord,
Mm-hmm.
because I essentially post all of my updates there about how everything's going and like what we're doing with the headset.
Mm-hmm.
And when the time comes to actually start crowdfunding, that's gonna be one of the first places that I actually let know.
Let people know.
So you
Okay.
definitely want to go there.
So I'll put this in the show notes later, but the primary website has a link to the Discord, the YouTube channel, is that TikTok? I don't know the logo of TikTok, but yeah, and Patreon and so on. So, do you have a timeline of when you expect to sort of open the crowdfunding at the moment?
I'm hoping before the end of next week, honestly. I'm gonna
Okay.
kind of risk it.
Mm-hmm.
But if I can go in and get around 50 people, I'm pretty sure that I can go and have the headset that I want to be
Cool.
finalized and sold to everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Although again, I'm willing to go and continue for more or or for less. It doesn't
Yeah.
really matter at that point.
Well, I mean, that 50 people is enough for you to sort of progress further is really, really good. Yeah, that's a very achievable goal, I think. So, um, so is there anyone in the chat who has any questions or anything they'd like to ask? Looks like no. I mean, there's a slight delay. So, well, Herman, thank you for the time for this interview and the time that it took for us to sort things out in advance of the interview. I really wish the project well. I hope at some point in the future I might have a chance to test out the boson. That would be really awesome. But thanks again. So it's walkerindustries.xyz is the website. And hopefully we haven't had a lot of people in the live chat. It is one of the questions I have myself actually. So if you happen upon this video later or you're here now, please let me know if there's a better time of the day. So let me know what time zone you're in and what time of the day you typically are available to watch a live stream. That would be really helpful. We've had people here throughout the call, but yeah. So thanks again. Thanks, Herman. Best of luck. I really hope that you get a good result. And I'll be staying in touch and following the progress.
Yeah, thanks for the interview and like asking everything about it. This is going to be really good later when I go and think more about some of the stuff that I'm going to continue on with, right? And I'm definitely going to go and keep in contact as the actual final product is being finished.
Yep. I'm more than happy to do another one of these when you've progressed things further, if you've got more to show off later on. So don't hesitate to reach out if you've got something you'd like to say to people. Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
Definitely sounds like a plan.
Yep. I'll end the stream now. Thanks for watching and thanks for everyone who watches later. Take care. Okay. Stream ended.